Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old not Athena. Ava and I have been here in Charleston, South Carolina for the last 3 or 4 weeks lending a hand on this fountain show Helia 44. Just so nobody gets confused, I should mention that this boat is not our boat. It belongs to Ava's sister Nina and her husband Julian. Ava and I are simply just here lending a hand. This week we're going to crack open both of the Saildrives to replace the seals inside. We're also going to be cleaning all of the canvas, and hopefully we get to apply prop speed to the propellers if we don't find any nasty surprises inside of the Saildrives.
My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the topsides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full-time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure.
Just so I could put the information in this video, I've been trying to find the official recommendation for Volvo on how often to replace the shaft seals in the Saildrives. I swear I remember reading 5 years somewhere at some time in the past, but I have not been able to find any kind of official recommendation as of right now. What I have found is a lot of forum posts saying anywhere between 5 and 10 years. So yeah, I don't really know, but the boat is up on the hard. We already have the props off. Replacing the seals is not that big of a deal, so we might as well do it. These are the seals we're going to be replacing. There's 2 of these in each of the Saildrives. We also have 2 big O-rings in each of the Saildrives, and we'll need a bit of oil to top off the Saildrives after we're done. I have done this operation once before aboard Athena before leaving Denmark, and back then it wasn't a big deal, so fingers crossed that's going to be the same in this case. There is an official Volvo Penta slide hammer you're supposed to use to get the bearing housing out. We don't have one of those, and you can do the same by just tapping the housing while pulling on the shaft. Looking at the housing, there are no signs of anything unusual or any wear and tear. The shaft does have some very fine wear marks from where the seals touch the shaft. I don't think these are of any concern. Getting the seals out is easy. It's just a matter of yet more tapping, this time with the screwdriver. Just as with the sliding hammer to get the bearing housing off of the Saildrive, there is also a specialized Volvo tool for pressing the new sealants and the sealing ring back into the housing. We of course don't have that tool, but what we have are 2 sockets we picked up at AutoZone. One is perfectly dimensioned, so it's just a hair smaller than the lip seal, and the other one is just a hair smaller than the sealing ring. When replacing the seals, it's very important to get them the right way in. One seal is keeping water out and the other is keeping oil in. If you look at the little seal here, there is a spring inside of it. That spring needs to be facing out, and on the other seal it needs to be facing in. In other words, the 2 seals need to face each other with this side here. The workshop manual, which I'll include a link for down in the description, specifically mentions to install these dry, so no lubrication. The first seal is in there now. Let's see if we can get the second one in there too. That is the second seal in there, and whatever little tiny gap there is between the 2 is nice and uniform. In our case, there were 2 shims inside of the bearing housing, so those go in next, and then this guy. That looks perfect to me. We're making contact with the shims, everything looks nice and even, so yeah, I think this is a success. I removed the 2 old O-rings using a little pick and cleaned the housing thoroughly before applying a generous helping of grease to the 2 new O-rings. I also applied a little bit of grease to the opening on the leg before putting the shaft back in, and then finally the bearing housing. The 2 nuts were tightened to 28 Newton meters as per the workshop manual before we then moved on to the second Saildrive. Get your foot? Yeah, a little bit.
Now, earlier when I said I was hoping we wouldn't find anything weird inside one of the Saildrives, that might have been a bit of foreshadowing. On the shaft in this Saildrive, the marks left behind by the seals are way more pronounced. You can even feel this one. There's quite a bit of a groove there. I don't have enough experience to say whether or not these wear marks are actually critical and they warrant a new shaft or not, but there's another issue here. Way back in there in the back, you can see the vertical shaft and the pinion. The vertical shaft doesn't look like it's moving, but that gear or the pinion there is wobbling about something fierce. I don't think it's supposed to do that, but also we can't remove the shaft here. It's like there's something jamming it in there. That is a little bit odd. The one on the other Saildrive and also on Athena's Saildrive, that horizontal shaft just popped right out. So maybe there's something on that Saildrive from the vertical shaft that's kind of dropped down a little bit and it's maybe keeping us from getting the vertical shaft out. Looking at the excellent workshop manual, on the vertical shaft there is the pinion gear and also a little nut. After copious amounts of wiggling, the shaft did come out, but look, it was just bouncing around in there. The nut from the vertical shaft. This is the pinion gear and here is the nut. And how crazy is it that this nut has either been just bouncing around inside of the Saildrive or at least sitting so low that it made contact with the horizontal shaft here. That is nuts. This nut started out life looking like this, nice and squarish, but ended up being completely domed. I don't know how long it's made contact with the shaft, but yeah, I think it's been there for a while. Besides the marks on the shaft here and over here, the gear looks good, the needle bearing back here looks good. I think Julian got really lucky here. We managed to get a hold of a really nice local guy with some Saildrive experience, and well, he had never seen one of these nuts come loose before, so that was kind of interesting. But also, he mentioned that he has seen shafts on Saildrives with more pronounced grooving where the seals touch than the one we've got here without any issues. So yeah, actually, I think this shaft is still usable. The threads inside of this nut are not doing so well, and also the end of the shaft looks a little bit domed. I think we can clean up the end of the shaft without actually pulling it out of the Saildrive, which would be a bit of a pain to do. And then if we can just get our hands on a new nut, then I think we're back in business. Then it just becomes a question of how difficult and how expensive is it going to be for us to get our hands on this little Volvo Penta part. Yeah, we'll figure that out. And while we figure that out, I'll hand you guys over to Ava. She's got her own little DIY project back at the Airbnb.
I have been tasked with cleaning Nina and Julian's enclosure, and as you can imagine, it is a catamaran, so there are quite a few more pieces than aboard Athena. But it's a bit nerve-wracking because they have quite a bit of clears and I really don't want to scratch those. I am very excited, and I never thought I would be saying this, to try 2 new cleaning products that I've actually been reading about for a long time, but I haven't been able to get my hands on just because where we've been at in the world. But that is the Ioso mold and mildew remover and some of the Imar cleaning products that are specifically for vinyl cleaning, but we will get back to these in a little bit. I'm going to be trying out different products and methods today because we have a bunch of different materials to be thinking about. We have this thicker isinglass plus a bunch of the thinner clear vinyl, and then all the canvas that's along the edge, and then we have this clear mesh vinyl, and then we also have the thicker solid vinyl. First, I want to give these babies a good cleaning because I suspect that a lot of these spots and marks are just dirt, so I just want to give them a good scrub and rinse them down. And just a little side note, I did reach out to Saildrive because if anybody knows how to clean vinyl and canvas, it is them, and they sent me some really helpful guides that I will put down below if you want to get a little more in depth. My goal is to not use any harsh chemicals like bleach because that can really break down the fibers in the fabric, and over time it can definitely break down the thread that's used to sew the fabric together. So I'm going to be using a very mild soap to clean. I'm using Woolite. Imar also has a cleaning detergent, but we don't have that, so we're going to use Woolite. And then I'm going to be using a scrub brush on all of the canvas and a microfiber towel on all the clears. So let's get to cleaning. For the woolite mixture, it is about a 1/4 cup of woolite to about a gallon of water. I just got done scrubbing all of the mesh vinyl, and I'm not gonna lie, the woolite worked really well. I mean, it must have been mostly just dirt and it came off really easily. There are some spots like on this tubing that you can see there's maybe a little mildew, so I might try the ISO on those parts. Next, I'm gonna work on this stack of clears, and for that, I'm just gonna rinse them down, use the microfiber cloth and the woolite, rinse them again, and then I'll see if they need a little polishing with the IMAR polish. I just finished cleaning everything, and as you can see, now I have it all hanging around the yard to dry. So now I'm gonna go back through because I noticed like these white ones have a few spots on them. So I'm going to try the ISO mold and mildew remover. It's real simple. You just mix 1 scoop of this, it's a powder, into a quart of warm water. You can scrub it on with a brush or you can squirt it. I'm gonna squirt it and then wait 15 minutes and cross your fingers. I just scrubbed and rinsed these white panels and they are looking really good. It got out all those little gray speckles, which is really nice. It didn't really work on this tubing and like the much harder and deeper stains. I would assume I would have to let that soak a little bit longer, but I think for those like lighter stains it worked really well and I'm really impressed. In order to put the IMAR protective cleaner on the clears, I have to make sure they're all dry, so I'm just gonna let them sit out for a little bit longer, let them dry, and do the polishing tomorrow. The next day, I set up my little polishing station equipped with the IMAR protective polish. You apply this with a cotton or microfiber towel until it's hazy, then use a clean towel to buff away the polish. It didn't take away scratches or scuffs, but it did help to clean the vinyl, making it nice and clear and shiny. Next, I had to tackle these 3 panels that are from the helm station and see the most action. As you see here, they have a film built up on them and they've slightly turned yellow. I used the IMAR cleaner and polish on them. Unfortunately, neither worked to remove that film. However, the IMAR protective cleaner really helped to shine the parts that were not foggy, and I will definitely be bringing some back to Athena.
Back here at the boat, it is now a couple of days later and I've gotten a little bit of a head start on next week's project number top priority, the keel. I am 99% done fairing the keel. There are just a few areas that needs just a dab more fairing compound. Yesterday we also cleaned out the pocket and fixed the tiny bit of damage we made with the sawzall when we dropped the keel. But let's get back to the Saildrive. We managed to get our hands on the freaking Jesus nut of the boating world here. This is a $22 nut. Here's the new nut. As you can see, it is nice and square, whereas the old one is slightly more artistic, rounded over shape. There's only one thing standing between us and success now, and that is the little bit of damage on the bottom of the vertical shaft. The damaged threads, to be more precise. There's no way for us to get the knot onto the shaft with the threads all chewed up, so we only really have one option, that is to file down the end of the shaft to clean up those messed up threads. Some call him a filophile, some call him the Filemaster 2000, others call him Julian. Filing down the shaft is not exactly made easier by the very limited access. The only tool we have for this job is that manual file, so this is gonna take a while, but the only alternative to filing down the end of the shaft is actually pulling the vertical shaft
which is also somewhat labor intensive. If our little filing adventure fails, if we don't have enough threads left, or if we just can't get the knot on there for whatever reason, the only other alternative is a new vertical shaft. It's not the end of the world. A new vertical shaft is only about $300, which seems a lot more reasonable than $22 for a nut, but it does require a handful of specialized Volvo tools. I've looked up a couple of the tools. There's a fixture plate and this spline socket. Each one of those is about $400 US. I haven't looked up the rest of the tools, but I'm sure they're going to be around the same price, and that adds up kind of quick. So if our filing job fails, this might be a good job for a professional, somebody that already has those tools. But yeah, fingers crossed for the filing. Julian spent about 4 hours cleaning up the thread, patiently filing away mere atoms of metal at a time. But in the end, as is often the case, patience was rewarded with, ta-da, an almost fixed Saildrive. As you can see, the pinion gear and the nut are back on the shaft. Now the nut is not torqued to spec yet, but everything's back in place and it looks serviceable. As per the workshop manual, the nut there needs to be torqued to 80 foot-pounds, I think it is. But in the workshop manual, they do that with the lower unit of the Saildrive here, the leg, removed, so that they use a little spline socket and a fixture plate to do the actual torquing. Worst comes to worst, if we have to remove the Saildrive and separate the lower unit from the upper unit or the gear housing, it's only about a day's worth of work, so yeah, I think we're very close to a fix here. Back when we had only just discovered this issue, we called around a little bit to try and figure out our options. We talked to a mechanic, described what we saw, we sent him some photos, and he promptly replied with, "You need a new Saildrive, sir." And he was also kind enough to provide a price of $12,000 US for the Saildrive, plus an additional $5,000 to $6,000 US in labor. Color me puzzled. When we politely asked him why he was recommending replacing the entire Saildrive when we saw nothing that warranted replacing the Saildrive, he replied with the fact that he had no interest in simply replacing the shaft because he had never done it before, he didn't know how to do it, he didn't want the liability, and also, and this is a direct quote, "That is not how things are done." It's of course completely fair that he doesn't want to replace the shaft if he doesn't feel confident in his ability to do that. That's perfectly fine. But I do have a couple of notes. The first little thing is that he never mentioned simply just replacing the lower unit of the Saildrive. He wanted to replace the entire Saildrive. You can just replace the lower unit. It's super easy to do. It's about an hour's worth of work. I did all the same steps when I replaced the diaphragm aboard Athena, and it's something a half-blind monkey could do with one arm tied behind its back. And yeah, that alone, that modification would save about $6,000 US in materials. He estimated $5,000 to $6,000 US in labor, arguing that it would be about 6 hours worth of work for 2 people. That sounds about right in terms of what I used for fiddling about with Athena's Saildrive and engine. But the little thing that's kind of odd here is that it's 6 hours for 2 people. That means those 2 people are billing between $400 and $500 per hour per person. That's a little bit steep. Plus, also, the retail price for a new Saildrive is $12,000 US. We called and verified that with Volvo, so I'm 100% sure he's not paying retail, so he's also making a bit of money in just the Saildrive. And last but not least, his attitude of "that is not how things are done" didn't sit well with me. It may not be how he does things, but there are a whole ocean of options available. Starting from the least expensive and also the quickest solution is what we've done here. Simply just clean up the threads, get the nut back on there. We have lost about a quarter turn engagement on the threads at the very end of the shaft because of the damage. I think a bit of Loctite will compensate for the lack of that little bit of thread. And I totally get why a mechanic may be not able to suggest this solution. He might have some kind of liability thing there. I don't know how it works in the US, but I could see that being an issue. So I wouldn't expect him to suggest this solution. The next fix on my list of fixes here is replacing the shaft with a brand new shaft. Like I mentioned, that would require some tooling. We can probably MacGyver some of those tools, but probably not all of them. So there might be a couple of grand worth of tools there, but then the new shaft is only $300 or $350 in materials. The next option is a new used lower unit or new used complete Saildrive. I found a new used one listed online as being in mechanically good condition for $2,000 US. Or we have the last option on the list, which would be either a new lower unit at roughly $6,000 US or a complete new Saildrive at $12,000 US. All of those different options could have come into play. Now, I totally get that the mechanic can't do all of those, maybe because of liability, and I totally get that he doesn't perhaps feel comfortable or doesn't have the tooling to replace the shaft. That's totally his business, but the attitude of that's not how it's done, that's a little bit frustrating. And at the very least, his option for his potential customer of replacing an entire Saildrive rather than just a lower unit seems a little bit off to me. Thusly cemented in my love of DIY and not being wholly dependent on so-called professionals, I'm going to end this week's video here. Now, next week, we're going to be attempting to get the keel reinstalled. That is going to be a major milestone and something I'm very excited for. So I hope to see all you guys back here in the yard next week for yet more glorious DIY fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!